Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Doug Brunke at Global Chamber. We've got a really expert group today on a very important topic. All of us as business owners know the saying that you're always selling, and that usually means you're selling the product or service that you're offering. But what about selling your business? I would guess, I haven't chatted with these three experts yet, but I'm guessing they'd say probably you need to have part of your brain thinking about selling your business as well during the ride. So while we're doing that ride internationally, there are lots of things to think about. There's a lot of preparation that needs to happen to make that sale to be as successful as you want it to be. And so we're going to be talking today with experts in different parts of that whole process and hopefully give you the information you need to be more successful. We are going to start today with our first speaker, and that's going to be Rick Shapiro. He's the president and CEO and founder of the Wheatley Group. He is a full-service mergers and acquisitions leader in the Western U.S. He is one of the smartest people that I know, and I know, like in the past, even before Global Chamber, whenever there was a business that had some quirkiness to it, like maybe an owner who didn't always listen to people, I would send Rick in because Rick kind of breaks it down into very rational and logical terms that even those kind of folks understand. So I really appreciate, Rick, your membership, really appreciate your support today, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much, Doug. I appreciate that. Let's get started with the concept. When it comes to helping sellers, concept of positioning. But before actually we get into that, I want to assert very strongly that whenever a seller is talking to a prospective buyer, or a merger and acquisition advisor, or an investment banker is talking to a prospective buyer, it is critical to understand that everything that is said verbally or disseminated in writing to that buyer has to be done with the utmost diligence, because I contend that everything that you articulate can ultimately affect the price, the terms, conditions, and liability issues. Buyers, by nature, are skeptical, and they listen to every single thing you say. So you need to have a well-conceived plan going forward when you're talking to potential buyers. When it comes to the issue of preparation, that is most critical. There's all kinds of preparation that one must do, and one must engage in objective, dispassionate analysis of their own company before going formally to the marketplace. That includes financial preparation, making sure your financial statements, your profit and loss statements, your balance sheets, your cash flow statements, your tax returns are in pristine condition. Make sure they're not muddled up with extraneous, unnecessary expenditures and things that don't relate directly to the company. That is absolutely critical. And it's critical that you engage in a recasting or restructuring exercise to make sure those financial statements are in excellent condition, because buyers are going to look at everything you do and everything you disseminate to them with a very, very critical eye. And if they see discrepancies or things that they don't like or that make them nervous, they will just back away from a transaction. So preparation in all areas is critical. Operational, marketing, legal preparation that Stephen will talk about later in the broadcast. These things are critical. Crossing your T's and dotting your I's before you go to the marketplace. A few issues to consider that buyers are concerned about and sellers need to pay serious attention to before going to the marketplace would be some of the following. Number one, management strength. Is the intellectual capabilities and intellectual capital of your company ensconced solely between the ears of the CEO, or is there a management infrastructure? Is there what's called bench strength to the company that can be articulated and run that company? For example, is the owner capable of taking a vacation, flying off to Europe, to Tahiti, or wherever for a couple of weeks? And in that case, will the company continue moving forward without missing a beat? That's really important, because sometimes the owner himself or herself is the heart and soul of the operation. So management strength and infrastructure is critical. Also, the type of transaction that we are engaging in. Make sure before you go to the marketplace, you understand the tax ramifications. That's critical. Are we selling stock? Are we selling assets? Is your particular legal entity C corporation, subchapter S, and LLC, and all of those factors play into what you keep at the end of the day. Because just because you get a lofty price with great terms doesn't mean you're going to keep that sum of money at the end of the day, and that's critical. Structure is also extremely important with respect to whether you're going to garner all cash, promissory notes, or earnouts. Earnouts is a situation where the payments are contingent. We don't love doing earnouts because, again, the key word is contingent. You may or may not realize that legal consideration, in other words, that price, if you will, but they can be crafted well by your counsel. But the nature of your structure is critical. Another factor that's really important is customer concentration. Buyers are quite nervous when they see a company that has a large client, let's say 30% or more, that generates 30% of the revenue or more, because if that client goes away, that can certainly tank a company. It can take it right down into the red out of a nice profitable situation. So making sure you have a diversified customer base is critical. Quality of earnings is critical. Competition issues are really important. And how do you distinguish yourself from the competition? Because buyers will want to know, what's so special about you? What's so unique about you? Margins, gross profit margins, net margins are important. Are they greater or worse than the normalized margins in your industry sector? Do you have any advantageous proprietary factors or components in your company? Make sure you articulate these extremely clearly to your buyers. Don't assume that they understand that you've got a wonderful company. Articulate them with great specificity. Barriers to entry. Some buyers will say, well, why should I buy your company? I can replicate what you do and spend $2 million doing so instead of paying you $15 million for your operation. Make sure you articulate that it is hard to get to your position. You've got great infrastructure, you've got a great reputation, and many other strengths and attributes. Strengths and weaknesses need to be articulated clearly, mitigate weaknesses, and make sure you articulate clearly the opportunities, the inherent buyer opportunities to take this company to the next financial level. That's critical. In terms of managing the process, I see I'm running out of time, so I'm going to cram a few things into the next 3 minutes. Make sure that things are done very confidentially. The old saying, loose lips sink ships, is quite true. So make sure only people who have a need to know the fact that you are going to the marketplace confidentially to obtain the best price, terms, and conditions. One person should be the focal point. You should have one. To give you a metaphor in basketball, you've got the point guard. You need to have one point guard, one person who's the focal point, who is articulating what you're trying to achieve. If you have a CEO, a CFO, a COO, and the VP of Business Development all involved talking to various buyers simultaneously, you may get the messaging done incorrectly. You need to be on the same page constantly, because you don't want to have any discrepancies when you're articulating various things to buyers. For example, a buyer might say, how many customers do you have? And the CEO might say, we've got 1,000 customers. The CFO might say, we have 800 customers. It's just a simple example, but you need to be on the same page in everything you articulate. When it comes to knocking down various hurdles also, discussing the strengths of the business, getting a lot of interest in the business, evaluating offers, needs to be done with one mind and very carefully again. Letters of intent and purchase agreements must be negotiated and crafted with objectives in mind. These things are all very critical. With respect to qualifying buyers, make sure you don't want to waste time. I call them WOTs, W-O-T, waste of time. You don't want to deal with WOT buyers. You want to deal with buyers who have the requisite capital, the requisite financial resources to make an acquisition of the type that you are engaging in. And you want to make sure they have the appropriate business acumen to be able to handle this type of transaction. So otherwise, you're just wasting your time. Don't be afraid to question buyers about their agenda, their capital resources, their acumen, etc. And I will sum up, because I can see my time is just about up. You need to put together a really, really good team. And that means I would suggest you have an investment banker or a merger and acquisition advisor who's experienced in this endeavor of selling companies. You want to make sure you have an attorney who is savvy and experienced in the transaction world. Make sure you have a financial advisor or an accountant who really understands transactions as well and who can get creative with structure, creative with tax issues, And you need to, in closing, make sure that you make compelling, well-conceived, intelligent arguments towards your mission of achieving an excellent exit strategy. That's it for now.
Fantastic, great kickoff. And you mentioned there are three folks that should be on your team: the M&A advisor, which you're one of the best, a financial advisor, someone who can be creative and thoughtful, and that's our next speaker, and then having a great attorney. And so Steve will be the cleanup hitter batting third today. So appreciate all of you, and that's a great way to kick it off. So several questions have come in, so continue asking your questions, and we'll get to those in the last half of our session today. Our next speaker is Lennard. Feltz. He is the founding partner of Pinnacle Financial Advisors. He's got more than 3 decades of experience, similar to all three of our speakers today, all very well experienced. What's really, I think, interesting and unique about what Lennard brings to the table is his international experience. And so he's very well qualified to not just handle the average type of wealth management and financial management issues, but also those that have unique challenges relative to international aspects, whether it's investors or markets or other parts of a business that might have international angles. So Lennard, thank you very much for sharing your expertise today. Look forward to hearing more.
Thanks, Doug. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, and I thank the Global Chamber for inviting me to say a few words. As Doug said, my name is Lennard Feltz. I'm a founding partner of Pinnacle Financial Advisors. We provide securities through United Planners and investment advisory services through Cirrus Financial, which are all independent companies. As Doug said, I've spent 3 decades, more than 3 decades in business, both domestic and internationally. I've worked abroad, actually was born abroad, and mostly in Western Europe, the Caribbean, Australia, those kind of areas. What we see is that, we're living in a truly interconnected world, which brings lots of challenges to and pitfalls to whatever we do. And that's especially true when it comes to selling or buying a business with international features. While many may be successful, of us may be successful in our own right building a business, when it comes to planning a transition, as Rick was saying, it becomes a totally different ballgame. We basically are looking for somebody to leave our life's work to and to have that carry on. Many times business transition, whether we're buying or selling, is not just a lot of it isn't hard-nosed numbers, but a lot of it is also something we build and put a lot of our heart and soul into. If you're selling a business, you may feel a sense of loss in the end, but if you're buying it, you're also looking for a culture and organization where you can do something with and that you can continue to grow your organization after the acquisition. In my years of experience helping businesses and business owners grow their businesses and ultimately transitioning to a new owner, if you will, many times the question that people have is, whoa, where do I start? Where do we even begin? And if that's not the first thing you're thinking of, you probably should be. I'd like to now share some of the insights and that we have learned over the years. And really it starts with, as Rick was also saying, start early. Really at the time of your business inception, you should start thinking about what does this need to look like for me to ultimately transition it on to the next owners. And those owners can be, third parties. They can be your own children. They can be relatives. They can be friends. They can be people in your network. They can be people that you met at Global Chamber, which is an excellent organization to help get in contact with people who may be interested in that. So when you get then to actually getting serious about the transition, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, how do I find a willing and ready buyer? And that is challenging for domestic organizations, but it can be especially challenging if you have your business has a lot of international operations, activities, sources, et cetera, because it really shrinks the pool of ready buyers who understand what it takes to operate internationally. And again, as I said, it's all the more important that you do a lot of networking to early on distinguish who might be the type of candidates who might ultimately be able to take over my business. And from the flip side, too, if you're looking to buy a business or expand your existing business with an acquisition, networking, friends and family, and ultimately, investment bankers, mergers and acquisition experts, et cetera, can help you do that. But it is challenging because if you've ever done it domestically, it just makes that much more challenges if your business has significant international operations. The next topic might be, well, what's my business really worth? And it's often important to get a formal valuation. Now, the formal valuation is, as I said earlier, is always important. It's not just important for knowing what a fair price might be between a buyer and a seller, although that is, the valuation that you might achieve is not necessarily the price at which the sale actually happens. It's where the willing buyer and the willing seller meet, and the valuation is especially important for tax purposes, and it ultimately depends on how much you end up keeping and how much you end up sending to the IRS or even foreign tax situations. That depends a lot on that formal valuation. And so finding a valuation firm that understands your business, that understands the countries that you're operating in, that understands how to analyze your business, your sales, your profit and loss, and all those things, is quite challenging. And you can't necessarily go to a ready list because you really need to interview them and find out who would have the expertise to really judge my business, because that's what they ultimately do. And the tax planning aspect of it is at least important. We've been involved in many business transitions, and there may be a lot of enthusiasm in the process. Oh man, our ship is coming in, this is going to be great. But how much you end up keeping at the end depends all on how well prepared you was going into the deal and negotiating the terms of the deal. And for that, you may need, especially if your business has a lot of international operations, international assets, international locations, you may need an accounting firm that can operate internationally, that is present in many different countries, who can pull people together from those different countries to come up with a comprehensive picture as to what your tax plan ought to look like. And that adds significant cost. It's very different if you're working with a local CPA on a domestic transaction, or if you have to hire KPMG or similar type of Price Waterhouse, what have you, type of accounting firm to make sense of it all. Another topic which is not unique to international businesses, but one that we often run into, is that I'm kind of becoming a therapist here a little bit, because many times it is not about, you do all the due diligence, you get all the numbers right, it comes down to signing on the dotted line and making the deal happen. And if you're an owner of a business who've grown that business from scratch, where it's been in the family a long time, your family name may be out on the buildings, and suddenly it's not you anymore. So that sense of loss that can occur is something that you kind of need to recognize that may occur early on. So when we are in conversations with our business owner clients who are thinking about, transition, this is kind of what I'm looking for, we really explore that aspect of it, which is not necessarily directly related to financial planning or the financial aspects of the deal, but it's ultimately necessary that when you sign that agreement and the deal is done, that you can feel good about it, and that you can feel very confident that your business is in good hands and you have other things that are going to occupy you and give you fulfillment in life. Summing it all up, the art and the ins and outs and art of selling and buying a business with international applications in 5 minutes, or even 8 or 9 minutes, is of course almost impossible. We did write a little blog post on the Global Chamber blog that kind of goes into a little bit more detail. I think it's the March 15th one, but I'll wrap it up here. Thank you very much.
Very good. It's also coming out in Business Magazine on May
great.
1st. So it'll be online there as well. So thank you. Great information. Our last speaker is Steve Sunnison. Steve, you're calling in and zooming in from Colorado. We appreciate your membership there at Global Chamber Denver. You're a partner at Cone, Payton and Payne. You have been involved with helping entrepreneurs and business owners make this transition. And so I presume what you've heard so far is something that you can relate to. And so we appreciate your bringing the legal expertise to the table here, kind of the three-legged stool. So thank you for participating today, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Doug, and I thank the Global Chamber for inviting me. And that's exactly right. I agree with what Rick and Lennard, excuse me, have said so far. And let me sort of pick up on some of those points. I think from a legal perspective, there are two buckets that I'd like to hit in my time here. The first one really is applicable to really any M&A transaction, whether it's international or not. And the second bucket are issues specific to international M&A transactions. As you mentioned, I am a lawyer, partner in a firm where I do almost about 80 to 90% are cross-border related, and a fair amount of those are M&A transactions. So on the first bucket, you know, and sort of, again, picking up on what Rick and Lennard were talking about, preparation is key. Because I'm sure you guys agree as well that oftentimes time can kill a deal. And so to be prepared really avoids that. And from a legal perspective, I'm always telling clients or potential clients, you know, are your corporate books and records in good shape? There are certainly instances where we've had clients that have come into us that have not updated. You know, they might have a C corporation. You're supposed to do an annual shareholders meeting or written consent. In lieu of that, your bylaws are requiring an annual regular board meeting, things of that nature. You don't want to be in a position where you have an LOI with a buyer and they're going to get copies of everything, obviously. And if you haven't done those types of things, it just, you know, doesn't look that good, and at the very least, it will delay the deal, which is in no one's interest. So that's one of the things. You know, protecting assets and making sure that they've been titled properly. I've seen instances where certainly just real estate can be a complicated matter, making sure that's all titled, but even things like intellectual property. I give an example of domain name registrations. Oftentimes, a business may register that in the name of the founder, or maybe even, which is worse, a website designer, not held in the company because it didn't exist at the time, and then people forget about it. May seem like a small thing. It's something that could be fixed, obviously, but you know, in some cases, you might have a party that has registered this website. It may be worth a lot, especially a tech company, and maybe the company, this person has now left the company, is not being cooperative. Those are some things you should look at beforehand before you get to that LOI process. You know, there are a lot of terrific lawyers that help businesses on a day-to-day basis, family business lawyers. I do recommend getting an M&A lawyer. There are lots of things that are happening in the M&A world. One quick example are rep and warranty insurance that you're seeing specifically with larger deals and financial buyers. And that sort of changed how you look at a purchase agreement and the reps and warranties and the indemnities. So those are some pretty big things that are evolving. And so you want an M&A lawyer that's doing M&A work for sure. And really, when you get to the LOI, you know, as we know, it's mostly non-binding. But if you have agreed on things in the LOI, and then you know get an M&A lawyer later on, it's going to be very awkward to try to change things around in the purchase agreement. And again, time, you know, it can be a deal killer. And so preparation for sure is the key. So that's sort of the first bucket. Now let's talk about some of the cross-border issues. because that's really, I think, in a lot of the viewers and listeners are probably in a situation where they may have a business with foreign contacts, sort of what Lennard was saying, foreign customers, foreign contracts, maybe in foreign subsidiaries, foreign employees. What are some of the things they should be thinking about? And again, prep work is key there as well. I give you one example. There's a law called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and it's an extraterritorial law. And so what that means is it applies to a U.S. owner that may have foreign transactions. And perhaps they have operations in Vietnam, let's say, for example, and a local official is telling this U.S. company, hey, you need to make a payment in order for you to get the permit to do your business. That may or may not be okay under this FCPA law because it's meant to prohibit bribery. And that's sort of an obvious thing, but there's sort of some gray area where transactions may not be permitted. Now, why is that relevant to an M&A transaction? Some of these potential liabilities may be assumed by a buyer, even in an asset deal, even if the agreement says they're not assuming it. And basically the DOJ and the SEC in this case take the position that a buyer that didn't do the appropriate due diligence may assume those potential liabilities. If you get a sophisticated buyer, and oftentimes you will, they're going to be doing their due diligence. They're going to have a team of advisors, including a legal team, that'll be looking at some of these issues. So again, you don't want any surprises. You don't want to be in a position where, in the middle of a deal, you have, well, what about these potential liabilities, and trying to renegotiate financial terms and what have you. So that's one thing to keep in mind. There are other laws that, again, should be looked at sooner rather than later. Export control laws. Again, most, even what we call local businesses today, have some international connection. And if you are a tech company, for example, there could be technical data that's subject to these U.S. export laws. In fact, even sometimes where it's being shared with someone in the U.S. that's a foreign resident. They're very, very broad, a broad set of laws. And again, if you get to an international M&A deal, you at least want to know sort of, are you complying? Have you been complying with the laws? In the case of export control law, you have seen where buyers will ask for, for products and maybe even a tech company, what's the ECCN? That's a sort of a code that's given to the product you're selling, because in most transactions, you will not need a license. You're going to be fine. And most businesses may not even be aware of these laws, and they're just operating and nothing happens and they assume everything's okay. That's probably because you don't typically need approval or a license. But there are situations where you do need that. So you just want to at least be aware of what you're doing presently and up through, potential M&A deal, because it will become relevant. I echo the comment about the CPA having like a foreign subsidiary. It complicates your return. You want to have a CPA that has international experience. There are concepts, transfer pricing, earnings stripping rules. There are all types of income tax treaties. You want a CPA firm, I think, that has the experience working on that. And there's certainly the big four that we think of. There are some other ones too that luckily do that, but that's definitely a key consideration. And when you get to the purchase agreement, I know I don't have too much time left here. We've sort of analyzed international transactions. You may also have a foreign buyer. That's pretty common as well, and more common, I would say. And so keep in mind that the purchase agreement itself may have certain provisions that are different than in a typical M&A deal, which is why you do want to have an M&A attorney, not only that does M&A work, but I think also has international transactions experience. One quick example, the jurisdiction clause. If you are negotiating with a foreign buyer, let's say you're an Arizona business, you may think that it's a good idea to have a jurisdictional clause that says disputes are resolved in Arizona. That may actually not be a good idea if you have a foreign buyer with little to no U.S. assets. We don't have a bilateral treaty on judgments with foreign countries. So even if you were to take a judgment, it may not be enforceable. So a little bit counterintuitive, but you may actually be better off with an international arbitration clause in New York. Even though you have to travel, that may be more enforceable in the event of a dispute. That's an example of the type of language or issues that are a little bit different when you have that international flavor. So I think I'm running out of time here, but those are sort of the highlights of things to think about. I do echo again what Rick and Lennard said. Preparation for sure is a huge part of making sure you have a successful deal. So with that, I will stop.
Fantastic. Thank you, Steve. Great points that you've made. We'll start handling the questions now, so send yours in, and we've got several that have come in already. And so number one is regarding this whole concept that Rick, you started out by talking about. How do you become objective in terms of evaluating what you've got here in terms of the business? And are there things that you do to get a business owner to think objectively? And also kind of related to that is, how is working with a serial entrepreneur different from somebody who's built one business their entire life and maybe kind of got it almost entwined in their own personality, versus a serial entrepreneur who's kind of already establishing the fact that they're going to sell this thing? Does that, I presume that makes it easier. How do you look at those cases?
Sure. Regarding being objective, the first thing we need to do is take your ego off the table. Take your ego right off that table, because you built this company, you may have founded the company, perhaps you acquired the company, you owned the company for many years. But when we fall in love with our own companies, we don't see things clearly. Love is blind. So it's important that we engage in a really objective, dispassionate analysis and not let our feelings get hurt. That can be conducted by a merger and acquisition professional. It can be coordinated with an attorney. It can be coordinated with a CPA and others. And the questions are going to be direct, and the owner needs to, again, I apologize for being redundant, get their ego off the table, because buyers don't care about your ego. They don't care about the fact you love your company. So it's important, though, to allow people to question you in a Socratic method. Ask a question, get an answer. Ask a question, get an answer. So we have a clear, great perspective about what this company is all about when we go to the marketplace. Subjectivity is wonderful in various areas. It's nice to pound the table about how great your company is. And you certainly want to do that when you go to the marketplace to extract the best possible transaction outcome. But you also need to be objective and default to objectivity when necessary, because you will be hit with questions where you're going to have to retreat to objectivity and candor, full disclosure and honesty about some of the issues that your company entails, some of the flaws. I've never seen the perfect company. Regarding serial entrepreneurs, they are an interesting lot. I have a company right now that I'm selling. This owner has owned this company for a total of 3.5 years. So we don't have a lot of longevity there. We can't say that it's been established for 10 plus years. And that's what this individual is all about. And serial entrepreneurs, they want to move quickly, they want to move fast, they're not as objective. Go, 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 go. But as Stephen and Lennard were saying, we need to prepare carefully. Not everybody is a serial acquirer and buyer. They want to look at things with objectivity and care and diligence. So again, preparation, getting your ego off the table, being objective, and engaging in this dispassionate analysis introspectively of your company. Because to use a medical metaphor, this will be like a proctological exam. People are going to look very closely at your company, and you're going to have to answer the questions honestly and carefully to the satisfaction of a buyer to get to a great transaction outcome.
Gotcha. So there's certainly a lot of transparency in this process that they may not be used to because they've been in selling mode for their product, service, and now their company, and they've got to shift out of that. So Steve and Lennard, how do you get a buyer or a seller to that stage? Is it really breaking I get a sense of it's almost like breaking them down by asking a series of questions that open up the door to all of the good things and the bad things about the business. And through that process, the owner has the realization of, hey, now I'm objective. Is that the only way to do it, or how do you see it?
Well, I see two thoughts are going through my mind. One of them is, if you are your own representative, then those subjective feelings become really difficult to handle, and the buyer often gets turned off on it, because you have to acknowledge you are not objective. That's why working with a good attorney, good M&A expert, an investment banker, it is key, and let them ask you the questions and then be your spokesperson to the potential buyers. From a financial planning perspective, we try to focus the business owner on what comes next. Often the proprietorsness is really what it hides is an uncertainty about what comes next. And if the owner starts to get excited about what his life or her life will be following the acquisition or following the sale, the attitude does change. Although nobody ever likes to be, to reveal as much information as what you're referring to around, they never share this much information with anybody. And that's also kind of where it helps working with a financial planner, because you first build a relationship of trust, you share that information with somebody you trust, then it becomes easier to pass that information on to a potential buyer of your firm that you're concerned about.
I might add, with respect to that issue, I'm an advocate. I'm trying to extract the best possible transaction outcome for my clients. So I'm making compelling arguments all the time. However, acknowledgement is critical. And also when somebody critiques a company, because they will find some things about the company that don't make them comfortable. And we can take the approach whether this glass is half full or half empty. And if I'm representing a seller, of course it's half full. I will make arguments and I'll say, however, on the other hand, except, but, because there's always another side to the coin. So objectivity is important, full disclosure and honesty is absolutely critical and imperative, but there's an argument to be made and an opinion that you can have to move towards your goal of getting the best deal possible.
Great, that makes sense. Steve, how do you typically get to the point where you're getting to that stage where there's an open and honest transparency so that you have what you need to proceed?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add to what Rick and Lennard were saying. I totally agree. Frankly, in many deals, you'll see a lawyer coming on, sort of being the last member of the team. But I agree with everything that was said. It's important from a legal perspective to be, really become a trusted advisor. And while we're advocates, we obviously want the best deal too. We also want to make sure we're practical and pragmatic about how we're providing services. What I don't want to happen is an overly technical dispute with a lawyer on another side that benefits no one. And so there could be egos. I've seen certainly in the past egos on the legal side too, and that's not really helpful to anyone. So that's sort of the way I approach any sort of transaction. Is that sort of practical approach, and hopefully building up a trusted relationship with the client so that you can advise them properly.
Okay, how do you see that difference between working with somebody who's got a business for a long term, it's their business, it's ingrained in them, versus serial entrepreneurs? How has that worked out for you, the relationships?
It really depends. I don't want to say that it's always this way or that way, but we have a deal now, for example, with someone that's basically run a company. It's been his company his entire life, and so you have to be a little bit sensitive to that. It doesn't mean you in any way compromise how you provide legal services, but I think just being attuned with the actual reality of a client, their situation, is some of that subjective interaction with a client, and especially someone that's owned a business and created this business, and it's been their entire life, it's their baby. That's a certain reality that you have to face and understand when you're providing legal services.
Okay. Do each of you have then kind of a go-to valuation person that you generally work with and that you can trust? Because it sounds like that would be another key aspect of kind of breaking down the barriers of maybe too close of ownership and looking at things more emotionally rather than rationally. The valuation people are a good one, right? Is pretty is totally unemotional, right? And just very objective. Rick, what you were describing earlier about just being really real about what's there.
I have mixed feelings about formal appraisals, quite honestly.
Okay.
There are some appraisers who are excellent, to do a very fine job, but there are I would say I agree with about 50% of the appraisals I see, to be very candid.
That's not
Only 50%, because a lot of times I find appraisers who are not in the trenches will use a formulaic approach. They don't always ask the appropriate questions, and they utilize assumptions in generating ranges of value, which I don't find to be accurate always. And as Lennard said earlier, you can have a valuation or an appraisal, but it doesn't mean that'll be the price at which we sell a company. Because if we're selling it to a strategic marketplace, we will try to sell strengths and attributes of that company to bring about a much higher price than what an appraisal might say it's worth. So again, I have mixed feelings. I have seen some appraisers who will come up with valuations which are much higher than what can be realistically achieved in a marketplace because the seller is paying for it and they want to please the seller, to be quite honestly. And I have seen also appraisers who come out with appraisals where we have beat the appraisal by 80%, come up with values and prices at the closing table which were superior to that number. So formulaic approaches don't always work, and they need to get in the trenches and ask a ton of questions, because sometimes in the financial statements we've come up with lots of other adjustable, recasted earnings components to enhance that bottom line and therefore enhance the ultimate price.
Okay, I gotcha. You seem to have that same sensibility.
Yeah, that's why I was saying that earlier, because and it's actually somewhat challenging sometimes, because an appraisal, depending on how it comes out, can be devastating to the owner, but a willing buyer might, to your point, a strategic buyer might be actually willing to pay a lot more for it. But I see the valuation being really, you need to have it for tax purposes. Ultimately, when you're going to go file the tax implications of the deal, your CPA is going to ask you for that. And having one by an objective valuation company that does that for a living is paramount for getting to keep as much as you can, basically, from the proceeds of the transaction.
Okay.
But you have to really not fixate on, and the other thing happens too, the valuation comes out high. Owners often say, well, I won't sell for anything less than that. But that may not mean that there is a buyer willing to buy your firm for that much, and you may never get a deal.
Yeah, correct.
Gotcha. Do you sometimes run into, and I think I've seen this myself, where at the beginning of the process, the owner has that idea of what is good, and then when they actually get the deal that meets their need, it's not good enough suddenly, because it's like, oh, maybe, like second guessing themselves that, hey, now I've got interest, so maybe there should be more interest.
Yes, frequently. A lot of people think they think that their company is akin to owning Apple stock. Mm-hmm. They think that their company frequently is worth a lot more because their neighbor read an article in the Wall Street Journal last week, and they think they can achieve some astronomical multiple that is not within the realm of valuation reality.
Yes. But in a financial planning process, though, even before we get to actually to the point of, okay, we're going to sell, we're going to transition, we will have, during the planning process, come up with a, quote, value for the business on the client's balance sheet that the client has consensus about, that is what we think our business is worth. Now, that is not an official valuation you can take to the IRS, but it is based on real facts on really how the business operates And that's why, again, starting early is important, because you have a few years to kind of, grow into a value that said, that's what I want it, to be. And then most of the time, because we've been working on it so diligently, the actual valuation, formal one, comes out fairly close to that.
And there are those factors, Doug, as well, beyond the financial statements that impact value and ultimate price. Risk impacts value. Issues about scalability. You might have a company that only can sell its product or service within Maricopa County, which is the Phoenix metropolitan area. You may have other companies, such as 2 companies I sold in the last 7 months. One of those companies generates 40% of its revenue from Europe and Australia and New Zealand. The other company generates 30% of its revenue also from abroad as well, from one location, Phoenix, Arizona. So, and another one I did years ago that we sold to Baxter Healthcare, a company now doing $10 billion of revenue, and they're in over 100 companies globally. So they were able to take this device and push it out globally through all over the world. So there's lots of factors beyond financial statements that impact value, but we've seen those that are higher, that are lower, and you're right. Sometimes when they get lots of interest, they think, gee, I'm not going to sell. But the marketplace talks.
Yeah.
And we understand the issues that pertain to risk. And we will tell our clients upfront, before we take an engagement, what the realistic range of value is. And we will tell them why.
It's also why, as a seller, it's important for you to know who your buyer is, basically. What could they do with this asset? They can do a lot more with the asset than you could yourself, and therefore it's worth more to them than to your neighbor.
Okay. And that's why the valuation might be tricky to do, because you may not have a complete picture of who the buyers might be.
That is correct. That is correct. Whether you have a financial buyer or a strategic buyer, those can lead to different valuation results or pricing results at the end of the day. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that makes sense. So that's encouraging, because both of you kind of hinted toward addressing those potential problems up front, well ahead of the actual process of looking at a contract to sell the business. So I'm imagining, Steve, in your case, it might be a little bit more difficult for you to manage that process, a little bit more transactional. How do you stay strategic in the activities that you do with clients?
Yeah, so really, being part of a team of advisors like these guys who have the expertise and experience to look into value and those types of things, those aren't really legal services. And frankly, again, many times we'll come on board after those types of things have been discussed and hashed out. So there's not a whole lot to do from the legal side, other than to sort of be sort of a support, the best way you can. But again, it's not uncommon for someone like us to come on board at the stage where there's an LOI, and so not too much of an input that we need to offer in that case.
Okay. Do you any of the three of you work like as a team, like in terms of like M&A, wealth management, CPA, legal, and then you're in the room with the business owner and you're meeting on some regular basis through this process? I mean, is that an ideal situation? And does that ever happen? And how do you make that happen?
Yes, it does happen. It reminds me of a phone call I had about 2 months ago with a CPA firm, the CPA firm of my client, who started off in the conversation saying, well, we don't think this is such a good price and such good terms. And I had a 90-minute, an hour-and-a-half conversation with them about the company. They were not aware about lots of pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses concerning the company. At the end of that hour and a half, they said, boy, this is an excellent offer. We didn't even realize that. When it comes to the transaction attorneys, the M&A attorneys, I think it's critical that we have dialogue with them, conversations not only about handing off to them the LOI, or they may have crafted the LOI and say, okay, you take care of the definitive purchase agreement, but I think they should understand the business issues as well, the material business issues, because business issues can intertwine with legal issues. They need to know about the strengths and weaknesses. And if possible, I strongly encourage, when it's on a local basis, the attorneys that get involved to visit the company, because by doing a walkthrough with that company, and seeing how they manufacture certain widgets or provide a service can also bring them to the realization that there are maybe other legal issues they need to work on in crafting this final document. So I think it's important for attorneys to understand the business side. So therein lies team effort with financial people, with the legal side of things, as well as with the seller. We need to be on the same page and understand what the goals are.
Yeah, and I can add, I wholly agree, and especially visiting. Now that may not always be possible. We're doing deals all over the U.S. and so it's not always possible, but visiting for sure the premises is a terrific idea because you get the feeling for what actually they're doing, but also like you were saying, there could be actual legal issues or risks or something that you're not aware of. And also, I think from the business owner also appreciates, that the lawyer's interested and hopefully gets it a little bit more. Because the reality is that when we're working on legal documentation, we're obviously we want to protect our client, inform clients about risks and so forth. In the end, the clients in consultation with the team will decide. They may sometimes be willing to accept risks and so forth. But really, I think the key for a lawyer, I think, is to be providing practical and pragmatic advice. And so again, visiting and being part of the team and understanding some of the more nuances is going to be helpful.
So we keep talking about you need to start early, and in our book, the way that looks like is early on, years before the actual transition, we typically start financial planning both for the owners themselves personally and for their business. And then during that planning process, we seek the input of the experts that will ultimately help them through the transition. And that allows the owner to build relationships with the attorney, with the M&A expert, with the valuation company, et cetera, so that we actually get to the point of, okay, now we're formally going into the transition. You're not suddenly needing to become comfortable with 4 or 5 people you've never met before. They've been part of, okay, building up to this. Now it's, and that may be, a billable hour here, a billable hour there, but it's all a worthwhile investment for the ultimate goal.
Okay, that's a really good point. Steve, just recently a potential member, and then subsequently they became a member of Global Chamber, called me asking for help, but basically an international organization, another country outside the U.S. was interested in investing in his company. And he said, well, I could do this myself in the agreement, but, I thought maybe you know somebody that could help. And it's like, yeah, I think it would be a really good idea for you to get help. And so we turned him over to a Global Chamber member. Those are kind of like the basics, right? So the next step is what you guys have talked about in terms of prior to even thinking maybe about selling the business, or from the date of the sale, having a team that gets together and knows each other and knows the business, so that you don't have to go through that at the last minute, or have team members who are disconnected from the process and not knowledgeable about various aspects. You talked a lot about that, Rick, in terms of, when you talked, I got the vision of a CPA who's looking at the numbers, but really those numbers are a reflection, one snapshot in time of a business that has lots of things going on, and there's those nuances that you're so good at that are important in terms of selling the business.
Companies are like live organisms. They're fluid with their suppliers and the employees and the clientele and the competition, and they constantly change weekly, monthly, and annually. And you're right, the numbers are a snapshot at that moment in time, but they are antiquated a month, quarter, a year later. And I would say 50% of the clients that come to us don't do any preparation. They wake up one day and they say, I want to sail the Caribbean, I want to move to Tahiti, and I'm done.
Okay, with what time frame?
They want to move ahead right away. The other 50% say, I'm a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years out, and I want to do things now to prepare to maximize, to optimize the best results. And a company we sold just this past October. I was talking to him for 10 years, and literally. And I don't think we needed 10 years of preparation necessarily, because this company went through all kinds of changes during that time frame. But certainly 3 to 5 years out would be a good time frame to start prepping and becoming knowledgeable about the transaction process.
Okay.
For us, that starts even earlier, because we're often involved with the business from planning and financial management perspective when it's still growing, when they're very much engaged, all with ultimately the idea to transition out. But that may be 5, 10, 15, 20 years away. And in the meantime, we're their partners basically in growing the business.
Gotcha. So normally they'll have a CPA and they'll have a wealth manager through the whole process.
Right.
And then and presumably they'd have legal representation as well, although it might be different legal representation, Steve, that relative to M&A. So is that something that, are you handling like contractual law and things like that, and then now they're interested in selling and you continue to represent them, or do you typically split that at the firm? How does that work for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So at our firm, we are a full service firm. My practice is not just M&A. I do a ton of commercial contracts. In my case, and those tend to be international commercial contracts. So, and I tend to do both. Not so much, sort of the general corporate lawyer, if you will. But to answer your question, there are both situations that will occur. In other words, sometimes we'll have existing clients within our firm that we've been doing general work for, and they're ready to sell. And that's, of course, a good relationship because we know the business well, and that's a big plus. Other times we'll come in where we have had no relationship whatsoever, and I'll come in to provide an actual M&A service for that client. And that's fine as well. There is some buildup, right, to understand the business and that sort of thing that doesn't exist with the first scenario. But again, it is important to whoever you're working with that someone is accustomed to M&A deals and transactions, and not just sort of the general corporate work, which is very important as well. But as I alluded to in the beginning, or mentioned in the beginning, there are a whole host of changes that are occurring in the drafting of the purchase agreement. And so you don't want to be in a position where you're not sort of aware of what's occurring. Who knows what kind of buyer this would be, but it oftentimes will be a sophisticated buyer with legal counsel that they know what they're doing. And so if you're a seller, business owner, you want to have someone on your side that sort of knows what they're doing as well on the M&A side. But yeah, so we see both situations occur.
Okay, is it 50-50 like Rick talked about? 50% of, hey, I want to do it now versus 50% of people that you've been working with?
Yeah, as far as how quickly they want to sell. That's probably right. I don't know exactly the breakdown, but I think that sounds fair, to me.
Okay. Did you want to say something?
No, I just want to tag on to what Steve said about attorneys. We sometimes have a client who says, well, we've been dealing with this attorney for a long time, and this one handled my former divorce. Not a good idea. Make sure you have an expert who knows what he or she is talking about, experts in this whole realm. And one other thing that may sound self-serving, it's honestly not meant to be self-serving at all. The issue of fees, the issue of cost for hiring an advisor. I'm going to strongly encourage people not to get caught up in about the fact that one attorney charges an extra $50 an hour, $100 per hour versus somebody else, or on the financial side or on the M&A side. If you're thinking about selling your company and garnering a price of X millions of dollars, don't get caught up in fees. You want to focus on somebody who has experience, who knows what they're talking about, who's been doing this for a while, and who you trust, who you think will get you to the finish line in the best shape with the best outcome. That minor change in fees between advisor A and B is not relevant in the big picture.
Gotcha. Great way to end the conversation. So don't get so fixated on those things that don't matter. And there's a lot of things that matter, and you guys went through a lot of them. So we'll summarize that in the blog post. If you have additional questions, let us know what those are, and we'll address those in the post that likely will go up next week, including with this video. So Rick, Lennard, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. Our next event, I think next week, actually, instead of a Globinar, we have a League of Extraordinaries. So we have a variety of Global Chamber members who are getting together next Thursday. So we're taking a break next week, but then we're going to be right back to our 1 or 2 Globinars a week after that. And so stay in touch with Global Chamber, stay in touch with the experts that are members of Global Chamber. They know what they're doing, they've got the experience, and they can help you be more successful. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug.